fact, you did add a different perspective there, so I think it complemented the other two speakers very well. What I heard, actually, though, was very positive. What I hear from all perspectives is that, as you said, Tom, the time for this program has come, and that it's a welcome addition to the CGIAR portfolio, both for its integrated perspective with regard to concepts, people, organizations, policies. It's hope that it will be able to work at different scales, from community to national to global, and that it really will contribute to refining our understanding of the linkages between the sectors of agriculture, nutrition, and health by providing really hard evidence, which I think both Jeff and Tom mentioned is right now patchy, that there are gaps. We make assumptions, we make leaps of faith, and we assume that it's all going to work out in the end. So, but I think the other sort of element that all three of you pointed out was that there is room for better communication, and that means actually working at this communication, changing habits, changing how one works together, and I think you emphasized this, Tom, in terms of collaborating more effectively around a single defined goal, such as reducing stunting. So with that, let me open it up to the audience. We actually do have 20-25 minutes to discuss. Yes, over there and then there. Let's take 3 or 4 questions first, and then we'll get a comeback. Yes.
Warren Keys down from ABRDC, the World Vegetable Center. Vegetable production is well below the minimum necessary for everyone to have good health in the world. And vegetable consumption for cultural and economic reasons is also well below the minimum in most countries of the world for good health. Now, I don't see any mention of vegetable production, consumption, and balanced diets within your proposal. And I just wonder if you could tell us how you are going to focus on that important, essential part of diets in this program to ensure that we're looking at balanced diets.
Okay. There was another, I think yes, right there.
Okay, Javier Ekbol from the Institutional Learning and Change Initiative of the CGIAR. As many people were, or several people were mentioning there in the table, this is a very novel project, an ambitious project, and seriously, you should expect to find many problems along the implementation. Everybody was mentioning that, and when you're dealing with something this magnitude, you should expect it. So my question is, I didn't see in the presentation, in the 2 first presentations, any mention about adaptive management and how you plan to deal with these issues. And I think there are 4 main topics I would like to see how you would like to deal with it. And one is emergent issues in nutrition. You know, we know that the dynamics of poverty are changing. People are becoming more consumers and less producers. We have urbanization. We have globalization. How will that be tested in the in the process of implementation, the CRP? The same thing is, what would happen with, how would you be fishing out or trying to identify new experiences that could add to your program? Let me give you just a very brief example. I saw in Mexico a small program in which the government gave each poor family a 25 square meter greenhouse that was enough to feed a family of 6 with a diversified diet of vegetables the year round. How are you going to capture those experiences and evaluate them in your project? The second issue is how you're going to test your assumptions. You mentioned that agriculture is really linked to nutrition and health. We all assume it is, and we take it for granted. But how is that working? Is it changing? The third issue I would like to see is how you are going to deal with emerging ideas from your researchers. As you go along, People start to think of new issues, new ideas, and the private sector has already developed very good mechanisms to fish out or to nurture these emergent ideas. And I haven't seen in all the CRPs and in the SRF a mechanism to provide the space for people bringing this. And the fourth, sorry, and last issue, as how are you going to test the partnerships? You're going to new types of partnerships you're going to engage. These are very new issues for the CGIAR, and I think we need to have a way of testing and learning on the process.
Good, that's a huge agenda worth of questions, but let me take one more here, and then we'll go to the panel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Placid Njoku. I'm from Nigeria, the Nigerian Institute of Animal Science. We recognize, that there is certainly great value in the agriculture, nutrition, and health continuum, which we recognize here. And we agree that that's valuable. There's certainly a drive from agriculture production to nutrition and to health, animal and human health. And we're happy with the value chain systems that have been adopted for both agriculture and nutrition. I think those are very critical. I mean, if you want to look at agriculture today or nutrition, you must look at the different components that drive the processes. And what this brings to the fore, what this brings here is that if you have inefficiencies in any of the components of the value chain, you can actually degrade the system, you can actually degrade the entire process. And therefore, we want to look at specific examples of, say, the avian flu or the mad cow disease or the African swine fever, where we have had very serious problems. And these have been associated with failures in production systems or environments of production systems. And we think that in these circumstances, in reviewing in the response of the international community to these problems, we have looked more at the health perspectives rather than at the production perspectives, the environment perspectives. And we are saying, is this study going to take care of all the other components, perspectives that are important? That in this continuum, in these processes, there's much more than the health aspect, that there are going to be production aspects involved. And it's important, therefore, that if we want to get the right results, results that are in fact not confounded by design failures, that we must take into consideration from now on those elements of production that are important in providing absolute efficiencies to the systems and the components of the value chains that we run into.
Thank you very much. I think we have three really good questions. One on vegetable value chains, I think. Another one on adaptive management with quite a few details with regard to testing different things and managing the process of research. And a third set, again, looking at value chains and inefficiencies in value chains and how those affect the system. And particularly, I think, bringing up the point that we often look at zoonotic diseases from the health perspective, but not from the other perspective. So, Marie and John, how do you want to split those up?
On the fruit, on the vegetables, but I usually combine fruit and vegetables. They are obvious. I mean, I think you mentioned you hadn't seen it in the proposal. You haven't seen it on the presentation, but fruit and vegetables are definitely in the proposal. They're part of what we refer to as nutritious foods. They go along with animal source foods, dairy. Fruit and vegetables are an extremely important source of micronutrients, and we completely agree with you that they are not only insufficient in terms of quantities available, but they certainly are not accessible to the poor in quantities that they need. So they are very much part of two components. The value chain component, obviously, for nutrition. We haven't selected any specific products that we will look at in terms of the value chain for nutrition, but this will be context specific and depending on the environment and the gaps in nutrition, in nutrient needs, we will decide on which value chain, and so that certainly will come up. And then in terms of the component 4 that is at the level of programs where we bring agriculture, health, and nutrition together, several programs that we have as case studies already, either we're doing already some work on them or we plan to do more work. For example, the work we've been doing with Ellen Keller is all work on homestead food production, and the major products in homestead food production programs are vegetables usually. We are now adding some small animals to bring up some of the bioavailable micronutrients in chicken, for example, or fish. But fruit and vegetable are definitely very much in this proposal. We're not dealing specifically, and that touches a little bit on the other questions about the how did you call it, adaptive management, nice name. We are definitely going to adapt as things change, but also as we evolve and as opportunities come up. And so the chronic disease part of it, meaning people being at risk of obesity or other chronic diseases because of bad dietary habits and sedentary life, is also very much in there, although not specifically laid out, but we realize how important it is, and fruit and vegetables are very important for the prevention of chronic disease as well. So it's very much in there, and as I said, linking to the adaptive management, I think we have to, we cannot set a program set in stone for the next 10 years. It has to be made to be flexible and to be changeable over time. I think you raise an excellent point, though. How do we ensure, what is the mechanism to make it adaptive, and what is the mechanism for making sure that we do respond and we do change over time? And for that, I will pass it to John.
Thank you. No, there were some interesting points there on the kind of adaptive management. One of the things we foresee in this kind of enablers, the policy investment kind of platform, is that's much more around the partnership, and it actually gets to some of the points that Jeff made it. How do you get a lot of critical mass thinking about these problems? I think there needs to be some kind of conceptual framework where you actually describe your assumptions and how you test them. I think initially we'll be weaker on the methodologies for doing that, and they need to improve. One of the ways we do it is the classic way that people do it. We get outside experts who can conceptualize a lot of things and put them together to challenge us severely. But I think we do need to improve the methodologies, especially around the partnerships and things that are, kind of fit for purpose partnership things that will be important. You also raise an important part about the kind of the think tank and the future foresight. And I think that's where, together with academic partners, but with people grounded in the realities of what happens, and we see that in some of the panels here, is there's a lot of richness between bringing in the development partners with the academics to link things together. So it's an evolving thing, and I appreciate the points you made. In terms of the value chain question, this is absolutely critical, because most of the people who we're trying to have impacts on are they're living in quite a complex environment. A lot of it is informal markets and things like that, and there's huge trade-offs, okay? And we don't want to, that was a bit the point about the hazards and the risks. I don't think we want to jump on people if they have any bacteria in their milk or something like that, because that's just not going to happen. It's more a process of continuous improvement, evolving things as they move along, and helping people both on the production side and on the risk side. And I think that's going to be a key element of this, and we've seen that in a lot of the bits of the CGIAR value chain work moving forward. But it's a good point, yeah.
Other questions there? Yeah, one over there. One over there. And two here in front. So these four, and that will be it, because we'll be running out of time. Okay. Sorry, I'm sorry. That one, and then these two here.
My name is Clifford Motero, ex-CGIAR, and now currently with the University of Pretoria, South Africa. I would like to observe that the success of this consortium research program will to a large extent be determined by how well the individual centers in the CGIAR collaborate. This has not been very successful in the past, going by the smaller initiatives that we were involved in. And I'm just wondering, how does the CGIAR intend to keep as many of the centers as possible actively engaged beyond the proposal development stage?
This is a question of actually putting your money where your mouth is, over there.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Shashi Sareen from the Food and Agriculture Organization, posted in the regional office at Bangkok. I just want to bring out that FAO has done a lot of approaches, it's done a lot of work on agricultural approaches to improving nutrition, both at the homestead as well as at the agriculture sector. And how does this program look at making use of those activities which have been done and leveraging the work of FAO and sort of partnering or programming along with the organization? Thank you.
Okay, a potential partner there. There were two questions here, and I see one more question there. If they're short and punchy, we might be able to get yours in. Okay.
Sure, I'll be short and punchy. Bill Pritchard from the University of Sydney in Australia, although I'm here really based on work I do in India. Two thoughts from the presentation. First is I think there's a need to think about what agriculture means and particularly situate it within the context of rural livelihoods. We sometimes think that farmers are agriculturists, and it's often the case that within a household there are multiple sources of income from non-agricultural sources, from remittances and the like, and I think to black box agriculture is very dangerous without a perspective on rural livelihoods. The second issue is value chains, and there was a diagram earlier of a value chain like a ladder, and I think a lot of the value chain research over the past decade or so contextualises it not as a ladder but a series of governance relations. Within a value chain there are certain actors who exert influence up and down the chain, and traditionally in agriculture that was the role of producer organisations, statutory marketing authorities in the global south, but of course most of those have been deregulated, liberalised, and increasingly it's actors such as international NGOs and supermarket chains in particular who exert those influences with massive implications on nutrition, oftentimes imposing their own restrictions which would go well beyond national guidelines. So I think when you talk about value chains, that literature on governance and that dreaded word power and who exerts power, I think is absolutely critical to the consideration of these issues.
Richard Tiffin from the University of Reading in the UK. I could be wrong in this, but I get the sense from the presentation that this, in terms of the science, this program is largely ag science driven, and it tends to take the nutritional science rather as a given. Yeah, that could be wrong, as I say, but clearly that's important that that is addressed if it is the case, because first of all, nutritional science is likely to move on substantially. There are obviously big wins over the next 5 or so years, particularly in the understanding of the way in which fats are used by the human body. And secondly, and possibly more importantly, if we're serious about closing the research gap between agriculture and health and nutritional sciences, throwing all of the money at agriculture and hoping that the nutritionalists pick up the money somewhere else is not going to be conducive to the dialogue that is necessary between them.
Okay, I'm going to ask these folks the panel to respond about collaboration, a very difficult behavioral change, about ag approaches to improving nutrition, about the context of rural livelihoods and non-agricultural things. You said it's not really a ladder, which is the value chain. It's a set of relationships, maybe a mesh. And then the very good point about nutritional science. So I don't know if you want to start from the back end or how you want to do it.
I'll do the one on collaboration from Cliff. And Yes, it is a difficult problem, and we actually spent about an hour and a half talking about it this morning after we got the comments back. We've tried to develop this quite jointly and collaboratively, but it's been done in quite a short period of time, too. I think what we're looking at is putting a lot of emphasis on the institutional relationships within the CGIAR, which is the specific question you asked. And I think we'll have to be clear about what the different roles and responsibilities are and how we work on that. And then give enough freedom to the researchers underneath that to work. So we're trying to pay quite a bit of attention to that. And you're right, it is quite a culture change, and we intend to invest quite a bit, because I think this thing won't work unless there's a deep partnership between the different centers, and we need new ways of working. On Bill's point about the rural livelihoods, absolutely. And I think one of the big points for us is that in a lot of the kind of global analyses of agriculture and its impacts, we forget the fact that most of the farmers we're dealing with are smallholders, and they're not optimizing on production. They've got other reasons they're optimizing, and I think you're very right. One of the other consortium research programs, or CGIAR research programs, excuse me, that is going on has a strong emphasis on value chains, on these governance relationships, etc. We're not trying to do the whole value chain work ourselves, but link with those and use a lot of the approaches they're using, but look specifically at how can these be improved for better nutrition and health and risk reduction on the health outcome side. So your point is well taken.
I think it's an excellent point about the ag science versus the nutrition science, but I think in a nutshell, what I would say is that we're finding here a niche where agriculture is a delivery system for nutrition interventions. There is a lot of nutrition science that's ongoing. It's not necessarily the role of the CG to do basic science in nutrition, but it's definitely the role of the CG to make agriculture more effective at improving nutrition and to make agriculture a better delivery system for interventions to improve nutrition. So we have, for example, agriculture, as I was talking about the disconnect, we have agriculture that has not done much in terms of improving nutrition. So we need to understand why it hasn't done much, how we can make it be a better vehicle for nutrition interventions. And we're up to date. There's a bunch of nutritionists working on that. We're up to date with what's going on in terms of the nutrition science and how to use it and how to bring in the new knowledge in nutrition into agriculture.
I wanted to say something in response to the issue of this being agriculture driven and the fact that there's pots of agriculture research money, but there's not much money for nutrition research. I think this whole proposal should also be a signal, and I don't know whether there are any representatives of donor agencies in the room, and they don't have to identify themselves. But this is a signal to the donor community to look at this issue of their own structure again, because a lot of the facts, a lot of the issues related to funding streams going to one or the other sector for research or in general is because the agencies themselves are sectorally divided, and a health department in one donor will not give money for an agriculture research project or vice versa. So something needs to be done to recreate the structure that gives room and funding streams for these intersectoral and multidisciplinary approaches. The other thing about funding I would like to say, and I was happy to see that Clifford is in the room, goes back to the time when CGIAR started the system-wide initiative on malaria in agriculture, which was taken up by IMI. And I remember clearly that at the time the Director General of IMI said, now we will finally have access to this great pot of money for health research. And I said, you're dreaming. What you see is maybe a big pot of money for pharmaceutical research, but the actual public health research pot is not a pot of gold that is now waiting to be picked up by agricultural research.
So last comments here, because I do think that if we're going to be in the Durbar Hall by 4:30, we actually will have to break. Do you, Tom or Jeff, want to add an extra word? Marie? John? Okay. Get me the last word. I'm going to go back to our colleague from the FAO who said, You know, the people have been working on ag approaches to improving nutrition for a long time, and there is a literature out there. I personally go back 45 years with looking at the relationship between ag and nutrition. But it seems to me that in some ways what's been laid out here is kind of a brave new effort. It's actually pushing the frontier in a new way. I like Tom's phrase here, the time has come to really take another crack at this. So I appreciate the fact that there is research out there and it needs to be brought forward, but I also appreciate that there are lots of gaps and we can't just say, oh gosh, we researched that before and we need to move on. So I sense a very positive attitude. Those of you in the audience who feel negative, catch John and Marie after the session. Thank you very much for participating.